The ketchup dripped down 12-year-old Deshaun Carter's face, its thick redness sliding between his tight curls, staining his white collar. The classroom fell silent. Mrs. Hoffman stood above him, empty bottle still tilted in her hand, a slight smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Looks like your hair finally has some structure," she said, voice dripping with fake sweetness. Deshaun couldn't move, couldn't breathe. What Mrs. Hoffman didn't know, this wasn't just any student she'd decided to humiliate today. Deshaun's father was Sheriff Marcus Carter, the most respected law enforcement officer in town. Before we dive into this powerful story, I'm curious, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Drop your location and time in the comments below. And make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you never miss another unforgettable story like this one. Deshaun Carter walked into Jefferson Middle School each morning with purpose in his steps. At 12 years old, he already knew he wanted to be an attorney someday, just like his grandmother had been. His backpack was always neatly organized, his homework complete, his questions thoughtful. Most teachers appreciated his enthusiasm, calling on him when no other hands went up. Most teachers, but not Mrs. Hoffman. Mrs. Hoffman taught science with cold precision. Her classroom walls were bare except for the periodic table and strict rules listed in bold red marker. No talking. No questions until called upon. No exceptions. When Deshaun raised his hand in her class, she looked right through him. When he turned in projects, she found small mistakes to mark him down. When he answered correctly, she'd say things like, "Well, even a broken clock is right twice a day." At home, Deshaun never mentioned these problems to his father. Sheriff Marcus Carter already carried the weight of the entire town on his shoulders. As the first black sheriff in county history, he worked twice as hard, stayed twice as long, and faced twice the scrutiny. Deshaun had overheard enough comments about his dad, affirmative action higher, and worse, to know that making waves could hurt his father's position. So Deshaun kept quiet. He endured Mrs. Hoffman's daily jabs about his unruly hair, her sighs when he spoke, her surprise at his test scores. He smiled politely when she asked if he actually lived with his father on the first day of school. Just get through the year, he told himself each morning, running a hand over his tightly coiled curls as he checked his reflection before school. Don't make trouble for Dad. But trouble was coming, whether Deshaun invited it or not. The science lab smelled of chemicals and nervous energy. Today's lesson, viscosity and flow rates. Mrs. Hoffman had arranged bottles of various liquids on her desk, water, cooking oil, honey, and ketchup. "Who can tell me which of these liquids has the highest viscosity?" she asked, eyes scanning the room past Deshaun's raised hand. No one. Disappointing. Deshaun kept his hand raised. Finally, Mrs. Hoffman sighed dramatically. "Fine, Deshaun. Since you're so eager, come up here and be our demonstration model." Deshaun walked to the front, standing tall despite the whispers behind him. This wasn't the first time she'd singled him out. "Stand right here," Mrs. Hoffman positioned him directly in front of her desk. "Today we'll observe how different liquids flow over different surfaces." She picked up the water bottle first, pouring a small amount onto a plastic sheet. Water has low viscosity, it flows quickly. Next came the oil, then the honey, each demonstration normal and scientific. Then she reached for the ketchup bottle, shaking it vigorously. "Now for our final demonstration." In one swift motion, Mrs. Hoffman tilted the bottle over Deshaun's head. Cold, thick ketchup splattered onto his scalp, dripping down his forehead, ears, and neck. "As you can see," she continued calmly as if nothing unusual had happened, "ketchup moves slowly over textured surfaces. Notice how it catches in Deshaun's unusual hair texture." The classroom gasped. Someone whispered, "Did she really just do that?" Another voice, "That's messed up." Deshaun stood frozen, ketchup dripping onto his clean white uniform shirt. The smell filled his nostrils, tangy, overwhelming. His eyes burned with humiliation. "You may return to your seat now," Mrs. Hoffman said dismissively. "Try not to drip on the floor." As Deshaun finally moved, legs wooden beneath him, he heard a small sound, a phone camera clicking. Alyssa Rodriguez, sitting in the front row, had her phone partially hidden under her desk, recording everything. The bell rang. Class was over. But for Deshaun, something else had just begun. Deshaun stood in the boys' bathroom, desperately trying to wash ketchup from his hair. The cold water stung his scalp, turning pink as it swirled down the drain. The door swung open, his best friend Marcus Jr., MJ, rushed in. "Dude, what happened?" "Everyone's talking about," MJ stopped, seeing Deshaun's ruined shirt and tear-streaked face. "Oh man. It's true?" Deshaun nodded, unable to speak. "This is assault," MJ said firmly. "My mom's a lawyer, remember? You need to report this right now." "And say what?" Deshaun's voice cracked. "That my teacher doesn't like my hair? My dad has enough problems without me." "This isn't about your dad," MJ interrupted. "This is about you. She humiliated you in front of everyone." Deshaun looked at his reflection. Ketchup still clung to his hair despite his efforts. His shirt was stained beyond saving. Shame turned to something else, something hot and determined. "You're right," he said quietly. "Let's go to Principal Warren." Principal Warren's office was cool and impersonal. The man himself sat behind a large desk, fingers steepled as Deshaun explained what happened. When Deshaun finished, Warren leaned back in his chair. "Are you sure this wasn't just an accident during a science demonstration?" he asked. "Sir, she poured ketchup directly on my head and made comments about my hair," Deshaun replied, disbelief in his voice. "Mrs. Hoffman has been teaching here for 25 years, Warren said, checking his watch. "She's highly respected in this community. But I'll speak with her, of course," Warren continued. "But between us, Deshaun, sometimes these things get blown out of proportion. Science demonstrations can be messy." Deshaun's heart sank. The principal wasn't going to help. As he turned to leave, Warren added, "I'm sure there's no need to trouble your father with this minor incident. He's got important work to do, hasn't he?" The message was clear: keep quiet. But walking back to class in his stained shirt, Deshaun made a decision. This wasn't just about ketchup. This was about dignity, his and every other student who'd been treated unfairly. For the first time since school began, he pulled out his phone and texted his father. "Dad, something happened at school. We need to talk." Sheriff Marcus Carter's cruiser pulled into the school parking lot precisely at 3:45 p.m. Unlike his usual visits, casual check-ins or career day talks, today he wore his full uniform, badge gleaming against his dark shirt. His face was composed, but Deshaun recognized the tight set of his jaw. Inside the car, Deshaun had told his father everything, not just today's incident, but every comment, every slight from Mrs. Hoffman since September. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, son?" Sheriff Carter had asked quietly. Deshaun stared at his hands. "I didn't want to make trouble for you. People already say things." His father's hand had gripped his shoulder. "Never, ever worry about my reputation more than your dignity. Understand?" Now, walking into Jefferson Middle School, Sheriff Carter wasn't just a father, he was justice in human form. Principal Warren's secretary jumped when they entered, immediately buzzing her boss. "Sheriff Carter is here with his son, sir." Warren appeared moments later, smile too bright. "Marcus. What brings you by? Is everything okay? We need to talk, Tom. My son was assaulted in class today." Warren's smile faltered. "That's a very serious accusation. Why don't we step into my office?" Inside, Sheriff Carter remained standing, one hand on Deshawn's shoulder. My son had ketchup deliberately poured on his head by Mrs. Hoffman during class today, accompanied by racially insensitive comments about his hair. Warren cleared his throat. I've already spoken with Mrs. Hoffman. She assures me it was an unfortunate accident during a science demonstration about viscosity. An accident. The sheriff's voice was flat. That specifically targeted the only black student in the front row? Now, Marcus, I've known Regina Hoffman for 20 years. She's not. Not what, Tom? Not capable of discrimination? Not the kind of person who would humiliate a child? Sheriff Carter's calm was more powerful than anger. I'd like to see the incident report you filed. Warren shifted uncomfortably. We handle these matters internally. So there's no report. As I explained to Deshawn, this doesn't rise to that level. Sheriff Carter took a slow breath. My son returned home with ketchup in his hair and on his clothes after being humiliated in front of his peers. What exactly would rise to that level, in your school? Before Warren could answer, there was a knock at the door. Ms. Rivera, Deshawn's English teacher, stood there looking determined. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said. But I think there's something you should see. She held up her phone. On it was a message from Alyssa Rodriguez with a video attachment. Alyssa sent this to me because she wasn't sure what to do with it. The video played clearly, showing exactly what had happened in science class. Mrs. Hoffman's deliberate actions. Her smirk. Her comments about Deshawn's hair. When it ended, the room was silent. Still think this was an accident, Tom? Sheriff Carter asked quietly. Warren's face had lost its color. I'll call Mrs. Hoffman in right away. No, Sheriff Carter said. This goes beyond a single meeting. I want a formal investigation. And I want it documented that my son reported this immediately and was dismissed. As they left the office, Deshawn felt both relief and fear. The truth was out, but what would happen next? His answer came the following morning. Walking into school, whispers followed him everywhere. That's him, Sheriff Carter's kid. Did you see the video? It's everywhere. Mrs. Hoffman's been suspended. Alyssa approached him at his locker. I'm sorry if I caused drama by recording that, she said. But what she did wasn't right. You didn't cause anything, Deshawn replied. She did. By lunchtime, the story had spread beyond school walls. Local news stations were reporting on a disturbing incident of alleged teacher misconduct. Deshawn's phone buzzed constantly with supportive messages from relatives who'd seen the story. But not all reactions were supportive. Some teachers avoided eye contact with Deshawn in the hallways. A few students whispered that he was playing the race card or trying to get famous. Mrs. Hoffman's suspension divided the town. Letters to the editor defended her decades of dedicated service against one mistake. Others called for her immediate termination. Through it all, Sheriff Carter maintained his professional composure, following proper channels, filing reports, gathering statements from other students about previous incidents. One night, Deshawn overheard his father on the phone. I understand your concerns, Mayor, but this isn't about politics. This is about my son. No, I won't be dropping this matter. With all due respect, sir, if protecting my child costs me my position, that's a price I'm willing to pay. Deshawn's stomach twisted. His worst fear was coming true, his father's career was in jeopardy because of him. The school board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the high school auditorium, the only space large enough to accommodate the crowd. By 6:30, every seat was filled. Community members lined the walls, their murmuring creating a constant buzz of tension. Deshawn sat in the front row beside his father, trying to appear calm despite the cameras and stares. Sheriff Carter wore a suit tonight instead of his uniform, making it clear he was here as a parent, not in his official capacity. Principal Warren and the superintendent sat at a long table facing the audience. Mrs. Hoffman and her attorney occupied chairs to their right. The school board members filed in last, taking their seats on the stage. Board President Elaine Matthews called the meeting to order. "We're here to address a serious incident that occurred in Mrs. Regina Hoffman's science class last week. Before we begin, I must remind everyone that this is a public meeting, not a trial." The superintendent spoke first, outlining the allegations clinically. Then came the moment Deshawn had been dreading: the video would be shown publicly. "We've received footage of the incident," Matthews said. "Be advised it may be disturbing." The lights dimmed. On the large projection screen, Deshawn watched himself walk to the front of Mrs. Hoffman's class. He saw himself standing tall, then the shock and humiliation as ketchup poured over his head. The audio captured Mrs. Hoffman's comments clearly, her deliberate words about his hair. Gasps filled the auditorium. Someone called out, "That's disgraceful." When the lights came back up, Deshawn felt exposed, as if the entire room had witnessed his humiliation firsthand. He fought the urge to sink down in his chair. Mrs. Hoffman spoke next, voice trembling with well-practiced emotion. "I've dedicated my life to education," she began. 25 years shaping young minds. This unfortunate accident has been blown completely out of proportion. She described the viscosity experiment in detail, claiming the ketchup bottle slipped in her hand. "As for my comment about Deshawn's hair, I simply meant that the thickness of his hair would demonstrate the flow rate well. There was absolutely no racial intent." Her attorney added, "Mrs. Hoffman has an exemplary record. Thousands of students have passed through her classroom without incident. We ask the board to consider the entirety of her career, not just these few seconds taken out of context." Several parents spoke in Mrs. Hoffman's defense. Community pillars like Dr. Thompson, who Sheriff Carter had once cleared of drunk driving charges, and business owner Elaine Whitley, whose shop the sheriff's department had protected during last year's floods, stood to praise Mrs. Hoffman's character. "This rush to judgment is exactly what's wrong with society today," Whitley said pointedly. "One mistake, if it even was one, shouldn't erase decades of service." Deshawn felt the room shifting against him. Then the board president called, "Sheriff Carter, would you like to speak?" His father squeezed Deshawn's shoulder before walking to the microphone. Unlike the emotional appeals before him, Sheriff Carter was measured and precise. "I'm not here as a sheriff tonight. I'm here as a father whose son was humiliated in a classroom, a place where he should feel safe and respected." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My son came home with ketchup dried in his hair. He came home questioning his worth. He came home wondering if he should straighten his natural hair to avoid being targeted." The room grew still. Mrs. Hoffman claims this was an accident. The video shows otherwise. She claims her comment about my son's hair wasn't racial. I ask you, would she have made the same comment about a white student's unusual hair texture? Sheriff Carter looked directly at the board members. "This isn't about one incident. It's about a pattern. Since this video emerged, 4 other families have contacted me with similar stories about Mrs. Hoffman singling out students of color. These incidents were reported to administration and dismissed, just as my son's initial report was dismissed." He turned to face the audience. "Some of you have spoken about Mrs. Hoffman's years of service. I ask you to consider, how many children have suffered silently during those years? How many children believed that speaking up wouldn't matter because adults wouldn't listen?" Sheriff Carter's voice softened. "My son didn't want to tell me what happened. He was trying to protect me, to protect my position in this community. No child should carry that burden. No child should believe that their dignity matters less than an adult's reputation." As he returned to his seat, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. What had seemed like a minor incident now stood revealed as something deeper, a symptom of a larger problem that had gone unaddressed for too long. The community was divided, but the truth had been spoken. And there was no going back. The days after the board meeting brought consequences no one had anticipated. Mrs. Hoffman was placed on administrative leave pending investigation, but the story had spread far beyond Jefferson Middle School. National news outlets picked up the video. Social media exploded with hashtags like #KetchupTeacher and #JusticeForDeshawn. For Deshawn, the attention was unbearable. Walking through the hallways, he heard whispers. He's trying to get famous off this. His dad's using this to score political points. Mrs. Hoffman's life is ruined because he couldn't take a joke. Even some teachers seemed to be taking sides, their smiles a little less warm, their greetings a little less enthusiastic when Deshawn entered their classrooms. At lunch, Deshawn sat alone until MJ and Alyssa joined him. "Don't let them get to you," MJ said, noticing Deshawn pushing food around his plate. "They're just mad because someone finally stood up to her." "Yeah," Alyssa added, "my cousin had Mrs. Hoffman 3 years ago. She used to make comments about his accent all the time. Nobody did anything then." "That's the problem," Deshawn said quietly. "This isn't just about me. But everyone's acting like I'm trying to bring down the whole school." The truth was worse than his friends knew. That morning, Deshawn had found a note in his locker: "Snitches get stitches. Watch your back." He didn't tell his father about the note. Sheriff Carter had enough problems. The mayor had called a special town council meeting about recent events damaging our community's reputation. Local business owners who had once welcomed Sheriff Carter now gave him cold nods or avoided him entirely. That evening, Deshawn overheard a phone conversation that confirmed his worst fears. "I understand your position, Mayor," his father was saying, voice tight with controlled anger. "But I won't be pressured into dropping this matter. Yes, I'm well aware the election is next year. No, that is not a threat I take lightly." When Sheriff Carter ended the call, he sat heavily on the couch, rubbing his temples. He looked up to find Deshawn watching from the doorway. "Dad?" Deshawn's voice was small. "Are they going to fire you because of me?" Sheriff Carter straightened immediately. "Come here, son." Deshawn sat beside his father, feeling younger than his 12 years. "Listen to me," Sheriff Carter said firmly. "Nothing that's happening is because of you. It's because some people don't like having their comfortable world disrupted. It's because Mrs. Hoffman has friends in high places who don't want to admit she did something wrong. But if I hadn't told you. If you hadn't told me, Mrs. Hoffman would still be mistreating students. The school would still be ignoring complaints. Nothing would change." His father looked him directly in the eyes. "Sometimes doing the right thing has a cost. But that doesn't make it any less right." Deshawn wanted to believe him. But later that night, he found himself researching other schools online, places he might transfer to, where no one would know him as Ketchup Boy or the sheriff's kid who caused all that trouble. The next morning brought another shock. The local newspaper's headline read, "Teacher's Spotless Record, Previous Complaints Against Hoffman Never Documented." The article detailed how Sheriff Carter had discovered that multiple complaints against Mrs. Hoffman had been filed over the years, complaints that Principal Warren had systematically kept out of her official file. By lunchtime, the school was buzzing with this new information. Students Deshawn barely knew approached him with stories. "She told my brother his English was too broken to understand science. She asked if my mom was my real mom because we don't look alike. She said people like me weren't naturally gifted at academics." Each story was like a stone, building a wall of evidence that couldn't be ignored. But with that evidence came more pressure. That afternoon, Principal Warren called Deshawn to his office. "The superintendent would like to resolve this situation quickly," he said, not quite meeting Deshawn's eyes. "They're preparing a statement about improved sensitivity training and diversity initiatives. Mrs. Hoffman will receive a formal reprimand." "A reprimand?" Deshaun couldn't believe what he was hearing. After everything that's come out? Warren sighed. Deshaun, I understand you're upset. But Mrs. Hoffman has agreed not to press charges against your father for accessing confidential personnel records in his investigation. This compromise benefits everyone. Deshaun felt cold all over. They were threatening his father's career, maybe even his freedom, to protect Mrs. Hoffman. I need to get back to class, he said, standing up. Think about it, Deshaun, Warren called after him. Sometimes it's better to move forward than keep fighting. That night, Deshaun couldn't sleep. Everything was falling apart. His father could lose his job. He was becoming a pariah at school. And it looked like Mrs. Hoffman would face no real consequences. Maybe Principal Warren was right. Maybe it was better to stop fighting. The superintendent's decision meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. 3 days away. 3 days for Deshaun to decide what to do. At breakfast, Sheriff Carter noticed his son's silence. What's on your mind, Deshaun? Deshaun pushed his cereal around the bowl. Principal Warren says they're going to give Mrs. Hoffman a reprimand and some training. That's it. His father's face darkened. Is that what he told you? They're trying to pressure a child now? He said you could get in trouble for looking at personnel files, Deshaun continued. Dad, maybe we should just let this go. I can transfer schools next year. It's not worth. Not worth what? Your dignity. The safety of other students? Sheriff Carter set down his coffee. Let me tell you something. When I became sheriff, an old-timer told me, don't make waves. Just keep your head down and collect your paycheck. You know what I told him? Deshaun shook his head. I said a badge that stands for nothing stands for the wrong thing. The same is true for being a father, or being a student. He leaned forward. Running away doesn't fix problems, son. It just leaves them for someone else to face. At school, Ms. Rivera stopped Deshaun in the hallway. I heard about the superintendent's solution, she said quietly. It's not right. What choice do we have? Deshaun asked. There's always a choice. She hesitated. For other teachers and I have written statements about previous incidents we witnessed with Mrs. Hoffman. We're submitting them to the superintendent today. Deshaun stared at her. You could lose your job. Ms. Rivera smiled sadly. Some things matter more than job security. Dignity matters. Truth matters. That afternoon, Alyssa and MJ found Deshaun cleaning out his locker. What are you doing? Alyssa asked. Thinking about transferring, Deshaun admitted. This whole thing is too much. MJ leaned against the lockers. So you're just giving up? After everything? It's not giving up, Deshaun defended. It's being realistic. Realistic? Alyssa's voice rose. You know what's not realistic? Expecting things to change if people keep walking away. You think you're the first student Mrs. Hoffman humiliated? You won't be the last if nothing changes. Her words hit Deshaun like a physical blow. He thought about all the students who'd approached him with their stories. Students who hadn't had a sheriff for a father. Students who'd suffered in silence. That night, Deshaun made a decision. He sat at his desk and began to write, not a transfer application, but a speech. If the superintendent wanted to brush this under the rug, Deshaun would make sure his voice was heard first. The day of the superintendent's meeting arrived with a tension that hung over Jefferson Middle School like storm clouds. Classes continued, but everyone knew that at 3:30 p.m., a decision would be announced that would affect them all. Deshaun had asked to address the meeting. Initially denied, his request was granted only after Sheriff Carter invoked student rights policies that the district had conveniently forgotten. As the final bell rang, Deshaun's hands shook as he folded his speech into his pocket. The superintendent's conference room awaited, along with Principal Warren, the school board president, Mrs. Hoffman and her attorney, and his father. Walking down the empty hallway, Deshaun heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw a line of students following, Alyssa, MJ, and dozens more. Some he recognized from Mrs. Hoffman's class. Others he'd never spoken to. "What are you all doing?" he asked. "Coming with you," Alyssa said simply. "You're not alone in this." "They won't let you in the meeting," Deshaun warned. A tall 8th grader named James stepped forward. "Then we'll wait outside. They should see how many students care about this." As they approached the administration wing, Deshaun saw something even more surprising. Teachers were gathering too, Ms. Rivera, Mr. Washington, Mrs. Chen, and others. Solidarity in their expressions. Deshaun squared his shoulders and took a deep breath. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It never had been. "I'm ready," he said, more to himself than anyone else. And he pushed open the door. The superintendent's conference room felt too small for the weight of the moment. Dr. Eleanor Banks sat at the head of the oval table, her expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. To her right sat Principal Warren, nervously adjusting his tie. To her left, 2 school board members whispered to each other. Mrs. Hoffman and her attorney occupied one side of the table, while Sheriff Carter sat on the other. A chair had been placed at the foot of the table for Deshaun, positioned like an afterthought. "Let's begin," Dr. Banks said, glancing at her watch. "I understand Deshaun Carter wishes to make a statement before we announce our decision. You have 5 minutes, young man." Deshaun stood, acutely aware of Mrs. Hoffman's eyes on him. The paper in his hands trembled slightly before he steadied himself. He'd practiced this speech for hours, but now the carefully crafted words seemed inadequate. So he set the paper down and spoke from his heart instead. "My name is Deshaun Carter. I'm 12 years old. 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Hoffman poured ketchup on my head during science class and made comments about my hair that humiliated me in front of my classmates." His voice, initially soft, grew stronger with each word. "But I'm not here to talk about ketchup. I'm here to talk about dignity. About respect. About what happens when the people who should protect us decide that some students matter less than others." Deshaun looked directly at Principal Warren, whose gaze dropped to the table. "When I reported what happened, I was told it was probably an accident. When my father showed video proof it wasn't an accident, he was told not to make trouble. When other students came forward with similar experiences, they were ignored." He turned to Mrs. Hoffman, who sat stone-faced beside her attorney. "Mrs. Hoffman, you hurt me that day. Not just because of the ketchup, but because you made me feel less than human. You've done the same to other students who didn't look like you or speak like you or learn like you. And the school let you." Deshaun addressed the superintendent next. "Dr. Banks, I know you want this to go away quietly. A reprimand, some training, problem solved. But it won't solve anything. It just tells teachers like Mrs. Hoffman that they can hurt kids without real consequences. It tells students like me that our dignity doesn't matter." He paused, looking around the table. Outside this room right now are students and teachers who've been waiting for someone to listen. They deserve better. I deserve better. Deshaun's voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. "I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for justice. I'm asking you to show every student at Jefferson Middle School that we matter, all of us, equally. That our school is a place where we're protected, respected, and valued." He took a deep breath for his final words. Mrs. Hoffman made a choice that day. Now you have a choice. You can protect her, or you can protect us. You can't do both. Silence filled the room when Deshaun finished. His father's eyes shone with pride. Even Mrs. Hoffman's attorney looked uncomfortable. Dr. Banks removed her glasses, cleaning them slowly as if buying time. Thank you, Deshawn. That was quite moving. She replaced her glasses and opened a folder. Before I announce our decision, there's new information the board must consider. We've received written statements from 5 Jefferson teachers documenting previous incidents involving Mrs. Hoffman. Additionally, our investigation has uncovered 17 complaints from parents over the past decade that were never properly documented or addressed. Principal Warren shifted in his seat, color draining from his face. In light of this pattern, Dr. Banks continued, and after reviewing the video evidence and testimony, the board's recommendation has changed from our initial direction. She turned to Mrs. Hoffman. Regina, your employment with Jefferson County Schools is terminated, effective immediately. Your teaching license will be reviewed by the state board. Mrs. Hoffman gasped. You can't. Additionally, Dr. Banks spoke over her. Principal Warren will be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into the mishandling of student complaints. An interim principal will be appointed next week. Warren opened his mouth to protest, then closed it, defeated. Finally, Dr. Banks said, her voice softening as she looked at Deshawn, the district will implement comprehensive anti-bias training for all staff, create a new student advocacy office, and establish clear procedures for reporting and investigating all allegations of discriminatory behavior. She closed her folder decisively. This meeting is adjourned. Mrs. Hoffman's attorney leaned close to her, whispering urgently. Principal Warren sat motionless, staring at nothing. Sheriff Carter placed a hand on Deshawn's shoulder, squeezing gently. As they stood to leave, Mrs. Hoffman suddenly stepped forward, blocking their path. You've ruined my career, she said, voice shaking with anger and something else, fear, perhaps. 25 years gone because of one mistake. Deshawn looked up at her, this woman who had seemed so powerful just weeks ago. It wasn't one mistake, he said quietly. It was a choice you made every day. I just happened to be the student who didn't stay silent. Outside the conference room, the hallway was packed with waiting students and teachers. When Deshawn emerged, questions flew from all directions. What happened? Is she fired? Are you okay? Deshawn felt overwhelmed until his father's steady voice cut through the chaos. Justice was served today, Sheriff Carter announced. There will be changes at Jefferson Middle School, changes that will make this a better, safer place for every student. A cheer erupted from the crowd. Students Deshawn barely knew approached to thank him. Ms. Rivera worked her way through the crowd to shake Sheriff Carter's hand, tears in her eyes. Amidst the celebration, Deshawn noticed Mrs. Hoffman exit the conference room alone, clutching her belongings in a cardboard box. Their eyes met briefly across the hallway. She looked away first, hurrying toward the exit as students parted silently to let her pass. In that moment, Deshawn felt no joy in her downfall, only relief that a wrong had finally been righted. 3 months later, spring sunshine streamed through the windows of Jefferson Middle School's newly renovated library. A banner hung above the entrance, Student Advocacy Center, Speak Up, Be Heard. Deshawn sat at a round table with 6 other students, the inaugural student advisory board created in the wake of what local papers had dubbed the Ketchup Incident. Their task: help review school policies to ensure they promoted equity and respect for all students. I think the dress code still has problems, Alyssa said, highlighting sections of the document before them. It says hair must be neat and conventional, but what does conventional mean? That's exactly the kind of vague language Mrs. Hoffman used to target students. Deshawn nodded, making notes. Good point. We should recommend more specific, neutral language. Dr. Patrice Johnson, the new principal, listened from nearby. Unlike Warren, she didn't dismiss student concerns or rush to defend the status quo. These are excellent observations, she said. Keep going. Outside the library windows, Jefferson Middle School looked different too. New posters celebrated diversity in science, literature, and history. The morning announcements now included phrases in multiple languages. Student artwork filled hallways once dominated by generic motivational posters. Most importantly, students walked with greater confidence. They reported problems without fear of being ignored. Teachers received training on recognizing and addressing bias, both overt and subtle. Not everything had changed overnight. Some teachers still resisted the new direction. Some parents still complained that political correctness had gone too far. But the culture was shifting, conversation by conversation, policy by policy. After the meeting, Deshaun headed to his father's cruiser waiting in the parking lot. "How was the advisory board?" Sheriff Carter asked as Deshaun buckled in. "Productive. Dr. Johnson actually listens." Deshaun smiled. "How was your day?" "Interesting," his father replied. "The election's heating up. Opposition's running those ads saying I created division in the community." Deshaun's smile faded. "Because of what happened with Mrs. Hoffman?" "Partly. But don't worry, polls show most people support how we handled it. Truth tends to win in the long run." They drove in comfortable silence until Sheriff Carter spoke again. "I saw Mrs. Hoffman yesterday." Deshaun looked up sharply. "Where?" "Community college. She was leaving a cultural competency class, part of her rehabilitation program from the state board." He tapped the steering wheel thoughtfully. "She asked about you." "What did she say?" "She asked if you were doing okay at school. Said she's been doing a lot of thinking about her teaching career. About how she treated certain students." Deshaun stared out the window, processing this information. "Do you think she's really changed?" Sheriff Carter shrugged. "Hard to say. People can surprise you, for better or worse. But she's facing her mistakes instead of running from them. That's a start." As they pulled into their driveway, Deshaun noticed a large envelope in the mailbox. It bore the logo of a prestigious summer law camp he'd applied to months ago, before everything happened. With nervous fingers, he tore it open. "I got in," he exclaimed, reading the acceptance letter. "And they're offering me a full scholarship." His father grinned. "That's my boy. They asked specifically about your advocacy work at school. Said they were impressed by your maturity and commitment to justice." Deshaun felt a surge of pride mixed with quiet amazement. The worst day of his school life had somehow led to this moment, not because of the humiliation he'd endured, but because of how he'd responded to it. That evening, he added the acceptance letter to a memory box he'd started. It already contained newspaper clippings about the school changes, cards from supportive classmates, and a dried ketchup stain on a scrap of his old shirt. Not as a reminder of trauma, but as evidence of transformation. The final item in the box was a note from a fifth-grade student he'd never met, slipped into his locker last week. "Thank you for speaking up. I don't feel scared at school anymore." Some days, walking through Jefferson's hallways, Deshaun still caught whispers about the ketchup kid. But the whispers held something new: respect. He had shown that a single voice, even a 12-year-old's voice, could create ripples that changed an entire community. And that was worth all the ketchup in the world. That's the end of Deshaun's story. Sometimes the most powerful change begins with the most painful moments. When Deshaun found himself humiliated with ketchup dripping down his face, he could have chosen silence. Instead, he found the courage to speak his truth, not just for himself, but for every student who had ever been made to feel less than. True strength isn't about never facing injustice, it's about what you choose to do when injustice finds you. And sometimes, speaking up changes more than just your own story, it changes an entire community. What would you have done in Deshaun's position? Would you have spoken up right away or kept quiet? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us of the human capacity for courage and change. Our next story is appearing on your screen now, you won't want to miss it.